Greg Combet, welcome to Capitol Hill.
Thank you, Lyndal.
Over the last couple of weeks, you've begun to fight back more directly on the opposition's campaign against the carbon tax, disputing the size of price rises Mr Abbott says will happen under the tax. While you say the rises will be minuscule, isn't Mr Abbott's message right that prices will rise?
Well, we've said a number of things about that. Firstly, what we're doing is directly rebutting Mr Abbott's unfounded misrepresentations on price impacts. He's going around trying to terrify everyone. The price impacts will be modest. We'll produce Treasury modelling that shows what they would be under various carbon price scenarios. But further than that, the commitment that the government has made to assist households is very important. We've indicated clearly that at least half the revenue from the carbon price mechanism would be used to assist households, in particular pensioners and low and middle income households. That's a very important commitment that will, of course, assist people meet any price impacts. Now, Mr Abbott's completely misrepresenting what the price impacts would be and, of course, conveniently ignoring the fact that the government will be providing assistance.
Your compensation, as you say, will be targeted. There will be a section of the population who won't get it. Given that during the discussion over the budget, even people like the Treasurer acknowledged that people on $150,000 are not considered rich. Is there a certain section of people who are at the upper end of the income band who may have cause to complaint if they don't get compensated?
Well, I think it's obviously the case that some people are in a better position to be able to meet any price impacts than others, and this is a Labor government, and at the end of the day, the people who have less disposable income to meet any price impacts are those particularly on low incomes, pensioners and the like, and we will target our assistance as best we possibly can at low and middle income households to make sure that they've got the assistance they need to meet any price impacts, and I don't think that's surprising.
Business still has some complaints. There are reports about the level of consultation. Are they right to be concerned, or can you really not start talking to business about the detail until you yourself have settled on what the scheme will look like?
Well, we've been running consultations, of course, with business about the issues that are most sensitive to them, and obviously one category, for example, is the treatment of the emissions-intensive trade-exposed sector of the economy, and the government has been saying to the business community that, well, look, let's take a look at the assistance that was offered to support jobs and competitiveness under the carbon pollution reduction scheme in the last Parliament, because it was very carefully designed. There were months and months of detailed work with the better part of 60-odd industries in particular to design an assistance package, and we're not going to walk away from good work. So we've been going through that in some detail and having a look at what residual issues or important issues, of course, in the minds of many of those businesses might be left that need to be attended to. And there's been a lot of discussion about it, but at the end of the day, the government has to negotiate a package that can find its way through Parliament as well. So we're focusing a lot of attention too on the discussions with the Greens and the Independents about that and many other issues.
So while the help to the emissions-intensive trade-exposed industries under the CPRS is the starting point, in every likelihood it won't be the finishing point.
Well, it's not appropriate for me to speculate about particular outcomes, but we've certainly made our position clear that the trade-exposed emissions-intensive assistance that really is to support jobs and competitiveness in important sectors of the economy, that our starting position has been what was developed in the last Parliament. It is a very comprehensive package. It's a 94.5% level of protection, if you like, for key industries from the full impact of a carbon price, but it still does retain an incentive for them to reduce their emissions, and we think that's an important element of it. So whilst there's been a lot of toing and froing and argument about that issue in recent months, we think that package is a pretty important starting point. That and many other issues, of course, remain to be resolved within the Multi-Party Climate Change Committee as well. Ministers
like Martin Ferguson and Wayne Swan have talked in the last week saying that the government's looking out for the interests of those working in the most affected industries, that coal still has a part to play in Australia's future, but how you treat the electricity sector, deal with assets like brown coal plants, particularly in the transition phase, will be vital, won't it? Because there's been talk that people might have assets stranded, that if there's financial loss, that maybe the plants which are needed in the interim won't be maintained as well. So there are a lot of dangers that lie in that transition period, aren't there? Well,
there are important issues that have to be addressed when you're developing carbon pricing across many sectors of the economy, but in particular energy. About 36% of our greenhouse gas emissions are emitted through the generation of electricity by coal-fired generators. 80% of our electricity supply is from coal-fired electricity generation, and so obviously it's a sector that's very sensitive to the introduction of a carbon price and has got an important role to play in the reduction of our greenhouse gas emissions over time. Therefore, the design of a carbon price mechanism and its application to the energy sector is very important and sensitive economically, and we're doing a lot of careful work. There's a meeting on today involving my department and Mr Ferguson's department with the energy sector to carry that work forward, and we're getting a lot of advice about it. We know what the issues are, but at the end of the day the government needs to achieve two key outcomes in putting the carbon price together for the energy sector. One of them, of course, is to ensure that we've got the security of the electricity supply for the community, and the other is that we achieve a transformation over time to lower emissions energy generation, and that's ultimately, of course, what carbon pricing is all about. You've promised more than half the money will go to households. What options will there be with the remaining money for really generating new technologies, moving them not only past kind of invention but into commercialisation? Well, there's three important objectives overall we're trying to achieve here. Of course, one of them is to assist households. The other is to make sure we're supporting jobs and competitiveness in the trade-exposed parts of the economy. And the other is to achieve the change to a cleaner energy future. And so innovation, the development of low emissions technologies, their application in the electricity generating sector, their wider application in the areas of renewable energy generation, these are all important objectives, and I think anyone having a look at what carbon pricing is about understands you've got to make a transition over time. We can't achieve significant changes overnight, so carbon pricing is important for long-term economic transformation. But ultimately it's about economic opportunity too, and economic opportunity through the investment that's needed in cleaner energy, through the investment that's needed in lower emissions technologies. And a carbon price provides the incentives for those investments to take place, and it will mean jobs growth and change in the economy over time. And that is, a central objective and reason for embarking upon this. You're having a weekend meeting of the Multi-Party Climate Change Committee. While this meeting won't settle on the final shape, the final design of the scheme, what decisions are yet to be taken in that design of the scheme? What will this meeting be trying to resolve, and what will we have to resolve over the next few weeks? Well, I appreciate you asking me, but it's probably not appropriate I give you too detailed an answer, because we've got to do these discussions inside the room. Ultimately, we've got to take the decisions that comprise a carbon price package. And all of those elements are on the table. They're all being discussed, and I've been in a lot of negotiations, and generally things aren't concluded until they're concluded. And we know what the issues are. We know what each party is interested in achieving. There are a lot of common goals. There's a good faith approach being taken by everyone, but the objectives that I outlined a moment ago, in particular in a general sense, that is to assist households with any price impacts, support jobs and competitiveness, achieve change within the energy generating sector, and in particular to get us on a path to a cleaner energy future. I think we all want to achieve them, and I'm going to be working as hard as I possibly can to make sure that we do, in agreement with the people in the Multi-Party Climate Change Committee. At the end of the process, will the plan you announced be the government's preferred option or the committee's preferred option? Are you aiming to get the agreement of everyone before you announce, or are you aiming to have what's appropriate for the government to announce? Well, the government's got very firm views about a number of these things, particularly the economically sensitive areas and supporting jobs and competitiveness in the trade exposed part of the economy. That really is a very important part of any package from our point of view. So we'll have a strong emphasis on the things that we believe are important for the long-term future of our economy.
But are you happy to leave some degree of indecision or some degree of areas where there isn't agreement between, say, you and the Greens to negotiate when the legislation goes into Parliament?
No, I can't speculate about that. Obviously, we want to reach agreement and leave no areas of indecision. That's very important. We need to resolve uncertainty about this issue in a very general sense. That is, the absence of carbon pricing in our economy leaves us on a pathway where our economic growth is very closely tied to growth in pollution, and ultimately, if we don't address this issue now, and we have to address it later on, particularly if circumstances are imposed on us by the international community, the economic adjustment is going to be that much harder and that much more costly. It's much better to make these structural reforms for the benefit of the environment and the economy on terms that can be agreed within our own democracy. We're already facing, for example, the first border tax adjustment, which is a carbon price imposed from outside on Qantas, for example, that flying into the European Union will face a carbon cost because we don't have a carbon price in our own economy. You know, the European Union's essentially saying to Australia, well, unless you get your act together, we're going to start imposing costs on you. This won't be the first and the last. It is the first, but it won't be the last, I should say. You've got to set yourself a path for the long-term economic competitiveness within our economy on terms that are acceptable to us and which is a manageable transition. So it's a very important reform to make, and it's important not only in our own economic context but in our role internationally. We do have a responsibility to play a role internationally to tackle climate change. All of these things are things that Tony Abbott just doesn't seem to be able to get. He doesn't respect the climate science, he doesn't have a realistic policy to deal with this problem, and he thinks he can skate into power just by terrifying everyone about it. I think it's